we are past halfway in our book right now, and we had to stop in the middle of a chapter yesterday, but we're going to pick right up. It was kind of a long chapter. So we're going to pick right up today. We have been talking about Sophie and the BFG are the two main characters in the story. And the BFG had gone off to catch dreams in dream country and taken Sophie along. And when they came back, he was telling her about all the dreams and how he captured them and put them in jars, and then how he labeled them, each with a label to tell a little bit about what that dream was about. And the dreams are like little, jellyfish, little blobs of jelly laying in the bottom. Maybe you've seen them on the beach when they roll up. That's what I can imagine that they're like. And they kind of pulse like they're alive. Sophie yesterday came up with a great idea that maybe they could blow a dream into the queen's bedroom that would play out the whole story of how the giants go running off every night to gobble up children in their bedrooms and make her dream that, and then put Sophie on the windowsill, who could then tell her the story for real. So they're mixing up a dream. The BFG told Sophie that they can mix several dreams together to make it turn out just like Sophie wanted it to. So right now they're in the middle of mixing. He has a big egg blender that is blending all the dreams together. And then today we're going to see what happens. So good idea to back up just a little bit. So here he was. Now he is mixing them up, the BFG announced. He went to the cupboard where he kept his bottles of Frobscottle. He took out a gigantic egg beater. It was one of those that had a handle that you turn. And down below there's lots of overlapping blades that go whizzing around. He inserted the bottom end of this contraption into the big jar where the dreams were lying. "Watch," he said. He started to turn the handle very fast. Flashes of green and blue exploded inside the jar. The dreams were being whisked into a green sea froth. "Poor thing," Sophie cried. "Oh, they is not feeling it," the BFG said as he turned the handle. "Dreams is not like human beings or animals. They is having no brains. They is made of zosimus." After a minute, the BFG stopped whisking. The whole bottle was now full to the brim with large bubbles. They were almost exactly like the bubbles that we ourselves blow from soapy water, except that these were even brighter and more beautiful, swimming on the surface. "Keep watching," the BFG said. Quite slowly, the topmost bubble rose to the neck of the jar and floated away. A second one bubbled up and followed, then a third and a fourth, and soon the cave was filled with hundreds of beautifully colored bubbles, all drifting gently through the air. It was truly a wonderful sight. As Sophie watched them, they all started floating toward the cave entrance, which was still open. "They're going out," Sophie whispered. "Of course they is," the BFG said. "Where to?" "Those is all the tiny dream bits I isn't using," the BFG said. "They is going back to the misty country to join up with proper dreams." "It's all a bit beyond me," Sophie said. "Dreams is full of mystery and magic," the BFG said. "Do not try to understand them. Look in the bottle and you will see the dream you is wanting for the queen." Sophie turned and stared at the great jar. On the bottom of it was something thrashing wildly and bouncing up and down and flinging itself across the sides of the jar. "Good heavens," she cried, "is that it?" "That's it," the BFG said proudly. "But it's horrible," Sophie cried. "It's jumping about. It wants to get out." "That is because it is a troggle-humper," the BFG said. "It is a nightmare." "Oh, but I don't want you to give the queen a nightmare," Sophie cried. "If she is dreaming about giants guzzling up little boys and girls, then what is you expecting it to be except a nightmare?" the BFG said. "Oh no," Sophie cried. "Oh yes," the BFG said. "A dream where you is seeing little chidlers being eaten about is the most frightsome troggle-humper you can get. It is a kicksy boggle-thumper. It is a wopsy grop-switcher. It is all of them riddled into one. It is as bad a dream that I blew into the flesh lump-eater this afternoon. It is worse." Sophie stared down at the fearful nightmare dream that was still thrashing away in the huge jar. It was much larger than the others. It was about the size and shape of a turkey egg. It was jellyish. It had tinges of bright scarlet deep inside of it. There was something terrible about the way it was throwing itself against the side of the jar. "I don't want to give the queen a nightmare," Sophie said. "I was thinking," the BFG said, "that your queen will be happy to have a nightmare if a nightmare is going to save a lot of human beings from being gobbled up by fearsome giants. Is I right or is I left?" "I suppose you're right," Sophie said. "It's got to be done." "Soon she will be getting over it," the BFG said. "Have you put all of the other important things into it?" "When I was blowing that dream into the queen's bedroom," the BFG said, "she will be dreaming every single ting-a-ling-a-ling you was asking me to make her dream about." "She'll have me sitting on the wall?" "That part is very strong." "And about a big friendly giant?" "I is putting in a nice long gobbet about him," the BFG said. As he spoke, he picked up one of the smaller jars and very quickly tipped the struggling, thrashing Trogglehumper out of the big jar into the small one. Then he screwed the lid on tight to the small jar. "That is it," he announced. "We is now ready." He fetched his suitcase and put the small jar into it. "Why bother to take a great big suitcase if you've only got one jar?" Sophie said. "You could just put the jar in your pocket." The BFG looked down at her and smiled. "By goggles," he said, taking the jar out of his suitcase. "Your head is not quite so full of grimy sludge as after all. I can see you was not born last week." "Thank you, kind sir," Sophie said, making a little curtsy from the tabletop. "Is you ready to leave?" the BFG asked. "I'm ready," Sophie cried. Her heart was beginning to thump at the thought of what they were about to do. It really was a wild and crazy thing. Perhaps they would both be thrown into prison. The BFG was putting on his great black cloak. He tucked the jar into a pocket of his cloak, picked up his long trumpet-like blower, and then he turned and looked at Sophie, who was still sitting on the tabletop. "The dream bottle is in my pocket," he said. "Is you going to sit in there with it while we travel?" "Never," cried Sophie. "Oh, I refuse to sit next to that beastly thing." "Then where is you going to sit?" the BFG asked her. Sophie looked at him for a few moments, and then she said, "If you'd be kind enough to swivel one of your lovely ears so it's floating like a dish, that would make a very great place for me to sit." "By gumbo, that is a squabbling good idea," the BFG said. Slowly, he swiveled his huge right ear until it was like a big shell facing the heavens. He lifted Sophie up and placed her into it. The ear itself, which was about the size of a large tea tray, was full of the same channels and crinkles as a human ear. It was extremely comfortable. "I hope I won't fall down inside your ear hole," Sophie said, edging away from the large hole beside her. "Be careful not to do that," the BFG said. "You would be giving me a cronking earache." The nice thing about being there was she could whisper directly into his ear. "Oh, you is tickling me a little bit," the BFG said. "Please do not be jiggling about, Sophie." "I'll try not to," Sophie said. "Are we ready?" "Owie!" yelled the BFG. "Don't do that." "I didn't do anything," Sophie said. "You is talking too loud. You is forgetting that I is hearing every ting-a-ling-a-lingy thing, 50 times louder than usual, and you is shouting right in my ear." "Oh gosh," said Sophie, "I forgot about that. Your voice is sounding like thunder and trumpets." "I'm so sorry," Sophie whispered. "Is that better?" "No," cried the BFG. "It sounds as though you is shooting off a blunderbuss." "Then how can I talk to you?" Sophie whispered. "Don't," said the BFG. "Please don't. Each word is like you is dropping buzz bombs in my ear hole." Sophie tried speaking right under her breath. She said so softly she couldn't even hear her own voice. "That is better," said the BFG. "I is hearing you very nicely. What is you trying to say to me just now?" "We is off," said the BFG, heading for the cave entrance. "We is off to meet Her Majesty, the Queen." Outside the cave, he rolled the large round stone back into place and set off on a gallop. And the next chapter is called The Journey to London. That's where the Queen lives. The great yellow wasteland lay dim and milky in the moonlight as the big friendly giant went galloping across it. Sophie was still wearing only her nightie. She was reclining comfortably in the crevice of the BFG's right ear, which was actually in the outer rim of the ear near the top where the edge folds over. This folding made a sort of a roof over her and gave her wonderful protection against the rushing wind. What's more, she was lying on skin that was soft and warm and velvety. I gotta feel my ear to see how that feels. Nobody, she told herself, has ever traveled in greater comfort. Sophie peeped over the rim of the ear and watched the desolate landscape of the giant country go whizzing by. They certainly were moving fast. The BFG went bouncing off the ground as though there were rockets in his toes, and each stride he took lifted him about 100 feet into the air. But he had not yet gone into that whizzing top gear when the ground became blurred with the speed and the howling wind. That would come later. Sophie had not slept in a long time. She was very tired. She was also very warm and comfortable. She dozed off. She didn't know how long she slept, but when she woke up again, she looked out over the edge of the ear, and the landscape had changed completely. They were in a green country now with mountains and forests. It was still dark, but the moon was shining as brightly as ever. Suddenly, and without slowing his pace, the BFG turned his head sharply to the left. For the first time during the entire journey, he spoke a few words. "Look, quick, quick, over there," he said, pointing his loud trumpet. Sophie looked in the direction he was pointing. Through the murky darkness, all she saw at first was a great cloud of dust about 300 yards away. "Those is the other giants, all galloping back home after their guzzle," the BFG said. Then Sophie saw them. In the light of the moon, she saw all 9 of the monstrous half-naked brutes thundering across the landscape together. They were galloping in a pack. Their necks were craned forward, their arms were bent at the elbows, and worst of all, their stomachs were bulging. The strides they took were incredible. Their speed was unbelievable. Their feet pounded and thundered on the ground and left a great sheet of dust behind them. And in 10 seconds, they were gone. "A lot of little girlsies and boysies are no longer sleeping in their beds," the BFG said. Sophie felt ill, but this grim encounter had made her more than ever determined to go through with her mission. Well, it must have been about an hour or so later that the BFG began to slow down. "We is in England now," he said suddenly. Dark though it was, Sophie could see they were in a country of green fields with neat hedges in between the fields. There were hills with trees over them, and occasionally there were roads with the lights of cars moving along. Each time they came to a road, the BFG was over it and away. No motorist could possibly have seen anything except a quick black shadow flashing overhead. All at once, a curious orange-colored glow appeared in the sky ahead of them. "We is coming to London," the BFG said. He slowed to a trot and began looking around cautiously. Groups of houses were now appearing on all sides, but there still were no lights in the windows. It was too early for anyone to be getting up yet. "Someone's bound to see us," Sophie said. "Oh, never is they seeing me," the BFG said confidently. "You is forgetting that I is doing this sort of thing for years and years. No human being is even catching the smallest wink of me." "I did," Sophie whispered. "Ah," he said, "but you are the very first." During the next half hour, things moved so swiftly and so silently that Sophie, crouching in the giant's ear, was unable to understand what was going on. Sometimes there were shops, there were bright lamps in the streets, there were quite a few people about, and there were cars with lights on, but nobody ever noticed the BFG. How was that possible, to understand how he did it? There was a kind of magic in his movements. He seemed to melt into the shadows. He would glide, that's the only word to use to describe his way of moving. He would glide noiselessly from place to place, always moving, always gliding forward as through the streets of London, his black cloak blending in with the shadows of the night. It's quite possible that 1 or 2 late-nighters wandering around might have thought they saw a tall black shadow skimming swiftly down the murky sidewalk, but even if they had, they would have never believed their own eyes. They would have dismissed it as an illusion and blamed themselves for seeing things that weren't there. Sophie and the BFG came at last to a large place full of trees. There was a road running around it and a lake. There were no people in this palace, and the BFG stopped for the first time since they'd set out many hours before. "What's the matter?" Sophie breathed under her breath. "I is in a bit of a puddle," he said. "You're doing marvelously," Sophie whispered. No, I isn't, he said. Now I is completely boggled. I is lost. But why? Because we is meant to be in the middle of London, and suddenly we is in green pastures. Don't be silly, said Sophie. I think this is the middle of London. It's called Hyde Park. I know exactly where we are. You is joking. I'm not, I swear I'm not. We're almost there. You mean we is nearly by the Queen's Palace? Cried the BFG. It's just across the road, Sophie whispered. This is where I take over. Which way? Said the BFG. Straight ahead. The BFG trotted forward through the deserted park. Now stop. The BFG stopped. You see that huge roundabout just ahead of us in the park? Sophie asked. I see it. That is Hyde Park Corner. Even now, when it was still an hour before dawn, there was quite a lot of traffic moving around Hyde Park. Then Sophie whispered, in the middle of the roundabout, there's an enormous stone arch with a statue of a horse and rider on top. Can you see that? The BFG peered through the streets. I am seeing it, he said. Do you think that if you took a very fast run, you could jump clean over Hyde Park Corner, over the arch, over the horse and rider, and land on the pavement on the other side? Easy, the BFG said. Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure? I promise, said the BFG. Whatever you do, you mustn't land in the middle of Hyde Park Corner. Do not get so fussed, the BFG said. To me that is only a snitchy little jump. There is not a ting-a-ling-a-ling to it. Then go, Sophie whispered. The BFG broke into a full gallop. Then went across the park, and just before he reached the railing that divided it from the street, he took off. It was a gigantic leap. He flew right over Hyde Park Corner and landed as softly as a cat on the pavement on the other side. Well done, Sophie whispered. Now quick, over the wall. Directly in front of them, bordering the pavement, there was a brick wall with fearsome-looking spikes along the top of it. A swift crouch, a leap, and the BFG went right over it. We're there, Sophie whispered excitedly. We're in the Queen's back garden. And that is it for today. The next chapter is going to be called The Palace. So now that they've gotten into London and they've jumped into the Queen's backyard, now we've got to watch out for the soldiers, for the armed guards that are there, and see how do they get this dream. And first of all, how do they find her window? So we have a lot of things to uncover tomorrow. I think it's going to be an exciting chapter. Have a really great day. I'm so glad you came to read with me again today. I will see you tomorrow for the chapter called The Palace. Bye, guys.